on the blog and via the YouTube channel, so people can see it who can't make it tonight. And with that, we're very excited tonight to be joined by Tiffani McCoy. She is the Advocacy Director for Real Change and co-chair, along with Ty Reed, of How's Our Neighbor Steering Committee, which is campaigning to pass I-135 on the social housing initiative. But I'll let her tell you more about herself and the work she's doing. And on to you, Tiffani.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I do have just a few slides just to kind of like set the tone and to give a base overview of what the initiative would do, and want to spend like the rest of the time digging into your questions. So I'm just going to share my screen here and go through a few of these. And yeah, just as Patrick already introduced me, I've been at Real Change for the past like 5.5 years, and the co-chair of How's Our Neighbors since its inception, I think 2 years ago now. So yeah, we got enough signatures. It took another round, but fortunately we got enough signatures to get Initiative 135 on the ballot. That took massive volunteer effort, paid staff effort, endorser effort to gather those signatures to get on the ballot. We did originally want to be on the November 2022 ballot, but didn't get the signatures in time, but are still going forward with a special election because, as we all know, like we cannot wait any longer on adding more tools to the mix to address our affordable housing crisis in the city. So we're very happy to have over 90 different endorsing organizations, elected officials. The Urbanist was a very early endorser. I'm just going to leave the quote up here for what the Urbanist submitted when you all endorsed the initiative, and just really recognizing at the end of this quote how this is an important first step, because that is what it is. This is the first step. I-135 social housing on its own is not going to solve our affordability crisis. I'm not here to sell you snake oil, but this is a really critical tool in order to start actually addressing the affordability crisis at scale. So just to really like ground us in the picture of housing affordability issue across Seattle. I mean, this is not just a Seattle issue. This is a King County issue. This is a state issue. This is a federal issue. We have not prioritized housing, especially like deeply affordable housing, based on folks' income as a country for decades. And we're starting to see, I mean, we have for years, but we're really starting to see the ramification of our housing policy as it spreads out across the nation, out of just urban areas into the periphery. So for instance, King County's rent increases are just like skyrocketing, Tacoma, Kent, et cetera. And then more like close to home, we also want to show this graph and talk about the affordability crisis and how it's impacting folks across income spectrums, not just those that are the lowest income. So not just folks that are the 0 to 30 or 0 to 50% of the area media income. We're talking about workers. We're talking about folks that, according to some, make enough money to compete on the private market. But if you talk to bus drivers, mechanics, teachers, social workers, educators, nurses, they're having an incredibly hard time affording living in Seattle. And we've already lost so many Seattleites from moving outside of the city to try to find more affordable rent elsewhere. And this trend just continues. We're really doing nothing to stave off the flight of workers from Seattle, or to really stop displacement in its tracks in our Black and Brown communities. So this affordability crisis is hitting everyone, and we need a tool that can provide housing as a public good. And that's where I-135 and the social housing model really comes in. So what do I mean by social housing? So in this initiative, what's baked in for social housing, I would say, is a universal principle, which I'll get into, and then some specific to the initiative. So talking about like the four pillars of social housing, the first pillar is that it is publicly owned in perpetuity. this is the universal principle. We still, in this country, in this city, in the course of the initiative, some folks think we're already doing social housing, or that social housing is something we've been doing for a really long time. What's new about this? Or people are equate social housing with public housing in the US decades ago. I just want to be like really, really clear here, just to ground our conversation. What is meant by social housing and how this model differs globally, where it is practiced, is that social housing is viewed as a public good. It is publicly owned in perpetuity. It is land and housing that stays in the public's hands, isn't able to be sold off to private developers or given away to other agencies to take care and stewardship of that. So when we talk about social housing, if we had to boil it down into like one sentence, it is publicly owned housing in perpetuity. It is a public asset. It's a public good. Social housing is also permanently affordable. The goal is not to make a profit, unlike the private market. And by allowing for cross-class communities, which is the fourth pillar, not just segregating out folks based on income levels, we're able to provide permanent affordability because A, it's not about bringing in a profit, and B, by having folks that make more, quote unquote, able to really help fund the model, we're able to just reach a lot more communities. And again, unlike historical public housing in this country, it's not about segregating Black, brown, and low-income communities out of the urban core. And for the social housing and for Initiative 135, we definitely are imposing a much stronger model of resident leadership than other models globally. But we were able to like craft this initiative with massive community input. So we wanted to make sure that residents have a say. I think that we all know that residents have very little say in their living conditions. And even though we have the Seattle Renters' Rights Commission and other, periphery groups, we just need to have, renters just need to have a direct stake in their living conditions and their building. So we baked that into Initiative 135. And yeah, it's right now we really think of housing, maybe not everyone in this room, but policymakers, let me be very clear, don't necessarily always view housing as a public good. Some of that is like unfortunate ramifications of public housing in the past. Some of that is because they believe it should just be commodified and the private market should deal with housing. But when we're getting into social housing and actually providing housing that people need, we need to start looking at it as a public good. We need to start thinking of housing as like education, as roads, as bike lanes, as different modes where the public is coming together and using their tax dollars for public good. So part of this initiative, this campaign, is about really getting people to think, why is housing not viewed as a public good in our society? Why is housing seen as a commodity? And for those who don't qualify right now under current affordable housing structures, why do those individuals have to compete on the private market and not also deserve access to affordability? I would say one other really big piece of social housing, the initiative, our impetus for doing this is, for me, working at Real Change with vendors for the past 5.5 years, talking with folks that have been swept for all of those years, for folks on long wait lists to get into affordable housing, or folks that were evicted for losing a job or getting injured on the job, and how that pushed them into homelessness, and how we have no safety nets to actually we do have some safety nets. We do not have significant enough safety nets to prevent the pipeline into homelessness. We believe social housing can help to slow down that pipeline into homelessness over the years by charging rent based on income. I'm happy to get into that more later. Another really important aspect of social housing and the initiative, I would say too, is this idea of growing in place. Right now, under a lot of current affordable housing mechanisms, if you make a bit more money and you are then over that federal threshold of low income, then you lose access to your housing. So yes, anecdotally, but vendors at Real Change, I know, And we have renters that we've run into throughout this initiative that have either put off raises or have not taken a side job because they are worried about losing that Seattle Housing Authority voucher, or they're worried about losing their space in another PDA. And just to be very clear, like, it's not the SHA and these other PDAs that are like doing this. They have to do these things because they're dependent on the federal government and that financing, and they have to follow these rules. Otherwise, it puts, you know, their status at risk. With social housing, you make more money over the life of your time in the unit, or you have, you know, a reduction in income, like you retire. You don't lose your house. The really exciting aspect too, and this is where we get into a lot of things need to change in order for this vision to become a reality, but we really, really would like to have ground levels of new social housing developments be dedicated to community resources, such as grocery stores, restaurants, shops, daycares, and health clinics. So we did draft that into the initiative that new buildings, the ground level, should be commercial space, and these are like the priority areas. And then finally, and I'm sure that there are a lot of questions about financing. How is this going to be funded? Is this going to take away from current affordable housing structures? The pie is so small. Like, why are you trying to go after like the few scraps that were given? Happy to spend as much time and answer all of the questions on this, but just wanted to give a very brief overview. And then this is my last slide of the financing mechanism of social housing. I would also like to just say that hopefully this week we will be releasing a video of a building that was just recently built in Seattle, and how that would be financed and which income brackets could actually be served by that. So like a hypothetical social housing bidding, we'll be releasing that this week. But for the financing, we will be seeking funding for a small capital grant, because we don't want to, and I just have to say, like, working at Real Change and seeing year after year after year how social services are always pitted against each other. We wanted to make very clear our intention that this money cannot come from current affordable housing projects. That's explicitly written in the initiative. So the idea that this model will take away from current affordable housing mechanisms, it's written in there that it can't do that. But really what we'll be searching for, and I know that Representative Chop will be submitting a budget proviso at the state level this year. We're going to be seeking annual small capital grants, and then utilizing municipal bonds to finance the building. The building will either be constructed brand new or acquired. Residents will move in, they pay their rents, getting back to that income spectrum of 0% of the area median income up to 120%. Those individuals, all based on their income, pay 30% of their income in rent, no more than that, maybe less. And just because you then have folks that are making more, able to contribute more based on their income, you have this effect of cross-subsidization. Again, happy to get into that more later. When the developer is buying a building, they're going to look at, okay, how much are the loans on the building? What do we need to be paying off annually to meet our mortgage payment? Okay, how much maintenance is this building going to require every year? And then what are the operation costs of the building every year? You put that all together. Okay, we need to be bringing in X amount of dollars every month in order to make these payments. That's what the rent is charged for. If there's any left over, if after 30 years the mortgage is paid off and all of that money is then freed up, that extra money, instead of going to like shareholders' pockets, goes into a revolving fund that then goes out and purchases or builds more social housing, and just keeps expanding that portfolio to create housing as a public good, and hopefully, you know, create a city that all can afford to live and thrive in. So I'm going to stop there and stop sharing screen and turn it over to Patrick or Doug.
Thank you so much for the presentation. That was really good and very, I think, very helpful seeing that. I'm just going to jump into some questions that people submitted, which maybe you touched on a little bit, but we can get into slightly more detail. How is the vision of this initiative different from what we have with HUD, SHA, MHA, Section 8, and all the other existing subsidized housing programs and policies?
Yeah, so there are a couple ways that this, is significantly different and would be additive. So social housing is absolutely a yes and approach. We need every affordable housing provider doing what they're doing right now and continuing to do that. But we all know, if we're being honest with ourselves and the public, that relying on what the federal government will ultimately finance is never going to meet our affordability needs. And we're also like completely ignoring a large segment of working people that aren't able to afford to live where they work. So the difference, one of the main differences is the fact that under the Seattle Social Housing Developer, it is written into the charter that this housing is publicly owned in perpetuity. It says explicitly this cannot be sold off to private developers. This cannot be sold off to other developers that do not share the vision of social housing laid out. If we look at social housing in other countries, in Vienna, in Toronto, in Britain, I mean, Singapore, that's a little bit different, but when you look at those models, they are keeping that housing in the public's hands. That's not something that you give off. You don't give off public assets. You don't give away public land to private developers. Those are community assets that should stay in community hands. So that's what's baked into the initiative right now. I mean, Seattle, we're really leaps and bounds above like what the federal government requires for affordability to be maintained under like the low-income housing tax credit. They say it needs to be affordable rents for 30 years, but they stop checking after 15 years. So it's really an honor system. And then after 30 years, if, say, for instance, a nonprofit needs to sell off that building because they're just like not getting enough income on it, they can, and they need to then sell that off to make sure that they're serving their residents in their other buildings. So, but then they're selling off like a part of the public land if it was given to them, a public parcel, affordable housing, because they're trying to meet their needs as a nonprofit, for instance. Where if we had a longer term vision, if we invested in housing as a public good, if we saw all of these assets as something that we should not be just like selling off, we would be able to have a completely different housing structure in this country, similar to those countries that I listed off. So while we here in Seattle have like a 50-year time limit, it's still after 50 years, those units do not have a mandate to stay affordable anymore. Those units do not have a mandate to stay in the public's hands, as if in 50 years, we will not need affordable housing. So it's more about adding like a longer term vision. I would say that's one of the biggest differences. And then getting into like really important smaller differences, whether or not undocumented immigrants can be served, whether or not students have access to affordable housing or not. There are a myriad of different ways that these are different, but like I said, overall additive. And also it's allowing like working class individuals to potentially live where they work because they're not having to travel 30 to 60 minutes a day each way to commute into the city. If I can just like share a really quick story. Seattle Education Association is an endorser of the initiative, and we are learning from their rank and file members that they're actually having a really challenging time recruiting teachers to come to the Seattle Teaching Academy, because teachers or prospective teachers look at the rent in this area and they're declining enrollment because they can't justify moving here and making X amount of dollars, and rent is, Y amount of dollars. So happy to get into like the exciting environmental differences as well. The fact that this developer mandates like passive house for all new construction. But I think I'll leave it there, Patrick, just to not be too long-winded.
Yeah, we'll definitely circle back to the passive house aspect because it's really interesting. Just to clarify the initiative too, so this is to pass an initiative to create the authority that the city will fund the administration of, but then presumably you said you'll get capital grants or pass an additional initiative to create a funding source to start doing stuff after you've been up and running. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. We did set out to couple the developer with a progressive revenue source. but learned that actually public developers do not have the legal authority to tax. So we still wanted to go forward, just following like Pike Place Market and the monorail, like setting up the vision and then going and getting the funding after. But we do have that provision in there that the city of Seattle does need to provide in-kind support for the first 18 months, because yeah, we didn't want this board of directors to have like no resources to get started. So we do have that laid out in there. And like I said, we do have Representative Chop submitting a budget proviso, and we are also working simultaneously on a potential revenue source. But the other thing I'll say that's really rad about public developers is like from day one, they have all of the legal authority to go and get money on their own. It's not something where they have to wait for like governments to infuse money for capital. So creating like papers to give to the developer specifically around like the Inflation Reduction Act and green energy housing. There's just like pots of money there to tap into. So from day one, they will be able to do like seek out grants and funding on their own, but we are also working to get a progressive revenue source because we need to be building housing and acquiring housing rapidly.
100%. Someone asked a question about could I-135 dovetail with the housing levy for funding? I know that the new housing levy is probably getting pretty baked at this point, but at least in future levies, could they work with that?
Yeah, I don't see why it couldn't do that. And I know that this has been like one of the tensions with like current affordable housing providers, and this is one of the tensions that the Housing Development Consortium rightly brought up, that this is like their biggest infusion of money every 7 years. So we didn't try to do that for this upcoming levy, but in the future, once folks are seeing that this isn't going to be competing with the few resources that current affordable housing developers need in order to provide the services they do, hopefully there will be like a little bit of a sea change and we'll be able to partner in those ways.
Yeah, have you and you just mentioned the Housing Development Consortium who sent they put out a letter expressing some skepticism. Have you been able to work with them to allay their fears or get them more towards neutral?
Well, interestingly enough, they actually are neutral. They're not opposed. That letter was just raising concerns. So I just do want to clarify that, because that's definitely by the media, not by you all, but like by Seattle Times and other, like this is the opposition. But Patience has said that like they're not opposed. It's just they were raising concerns, which everyone has total right to do. And then, yeah, I would say just this last week, we signed a letter with HDC, with the Urbanist, with others around the comprehensive plan, because we need a really, really strong revision of the comprehensive plan in order to make social housing even a viable opportunity. So I think that's really great progress that we were able to like come to agreement and find some common ground there, and then just build off of that for the future, because we really do all share the same goals, I think.
Yeah, 100%. Someone asked, do PDAs always require a public vote, or could the city council create one on its own? And could they just pass this if they wanted to?
The city council most certainly could just create a public developer on them. They most certainly could have created, well, I'll say they could have created something like this on their own. Would it have included all of the like really bold proposals, such as like passive house and renter input, and keeping the land in public hands, keeping the buildings in public's hands, and also just the makeup of the board, I would say, as well. We just weren't going to put that much risk into it. Like it was a political choice for us to go the way that we did through the ballot. We also wanted to build a movement and to like get people really inspired to like fight for all of these other changes that, I mean, you all know very keenly what that we need to do. So yes, they could pass it. Would it be what we have laid out? No.
Yeah. So you mentioned the makeup of the board. Is there something we should know, you want to share about that, or the?
Yeah, that was actually probably in the drafting period. One of the things that we took the longest on was the drafting the governance board, because there's just so much to think about, you know. So we proposed a 13-member governance board. The majority, 7 of which would be renters. They would be residents of the social housing buildings. From day one, there's not going to be any social housing buildings. So we actually have the Renters Commission, Seattle Renters Commission, appointing the first 7 renters to be on the board. And we laid out in the initiative very purposefully that they have to be across the income spectrums that the developer would be serving. So they need to be folks between 0 to 120% area median income, folks that have faced eviction, folks that have, like, you know, faced housing instability or homelessness. So, but yes, going forward, the majority, 7 are renters. And then we have 1 that will always be for a rank and file union member. MLK Labor will decide the first one. We actually have a community member that serves marginalized populations. El Centro de la Raza will be the first org to appoint to that position. The city council and the mayor together get 3 total, not 3 each, 3 total. And that will be a public housing finance expert. That will be a nonprofit developer and an urban planner. And then we also have someone that will be appointed by the Green New Deal Oversight Board, and they will appoint a green building expert to serve on the board. So we really wanted to have like that cross section of Seattle, income wise and just like expertise wise of what the developer will be creating, and wanted to make sure there's a lot of community, like deep community roots, not just folks that are, you know, commonly appointed by mayors and councils on the board.
Yeah, that sounds really great. Along those same lines, you said, I think maybe one of the most dynamic or radical parts of the proposal is the resident management. Could you dive a little bit into that and what that looks like on the ground, like for someone who lived in the building, or for, you know, building management on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so in addition to renters having like the majority on the board, they're the ones that live there, they know it the best. So in the future, after, you know, the first term is up and there are residents of the social housing buildings, it will actually be elections within the social housing residents themselves. They'll run for the seats on the board, and they will elect who they want on the board. So it'll be completely from within, that they're deciding who are representing their interests on this board. And then, we also have a provision in there that each building should have a resident governance council. So kind of like just a tenants union in every building, and the ability to give input on the building. Like maybe there's, you know, after the loan is paid off and there's time for some upgrades, maybe folks will be able to have a say, and let's have solar panels versus a heat pump. I mean, that's a bad example, but you get the gist. Like residents actually having a say in their buildings, and also like community spaces and how community rooms are used. So just having input and creating community, getting away from like, we're just here, we rent, we go into our home at night, we leave in the morning, we don't say hi to each other. So like just creating community at the like base level. So yeah, I think that I think that answers your question. If I'm not, I got distracted by the chat.
Oh, yeah, we can jump into that too. Because so in my day job, I'm an architect who works on housing. But one of the things that comes up is, you know, even if you had like a bunch of money fall into your lap tomorrow, it would take 4 years for a building to open. So presumably you're going to start by acquiring existing buildings, and, you know, presumably also the idea of stopping displacement of, you know, in those buildings. But the question that Ian just asked, like, what criteria do you use, and what's your ideal building look like?
Well, those are two really great questions, but I'll take yours first, Patrick. Yeah, I do. We imagine in the first couple of years, especially with like starting up, the developer, getting it staffed, getting the board up and running, getting grants, getting money in. Yeah, it'll be acquiring buildings. So if I may just give a really, really concrete example of an alternate universe where this has already passed and is as a well-established agency. This past year, there is an apartment building in Capitol Hill called the Madison apartment. It's on, I believe, it's either 11th in Madison or 18th in Madison. But anyways, it's right across from the Central Co-op. And for decades, this has been a place where residents have lived and paid below market rent because the owner just that wasn't interested in, gouging for rent. So you have people that have lived in the Madkin between like 5 years to 40 years. You have folks that have been there for a very long time. So what happens, unfortunately, is that the owner passed away. And then the owner's sister took ownership of the building and wanted to just, be done with it, sell it. And that is a prime place of real estate. And you're able to make a lot of money off of that. So the Madkin residents actually like organized to try to keep their building like themselves. They didn't have the capital to put up to turn it into a co-op or something, but they went to the tenants union. The tenants union helped them to reach out to almost every nonprofit in the city of Seattle. Can you take on this building? Will you buy it and we pay the rent? But no one was set up to do that. So in this hypothetical universe where the Seattle social housing developer exists, this could buy that building and keep all of these residents and that community that's already established there and keep that building in public hands. Unfortunately, that's just not what happened, regardless of like how hard the Madkin residents tried to fight that. So that's just a very concrete example for like what could happen in the first year. There's probably a lot more of these scenarios that are playing out in Seattle every day. And then to Ian's question, like was it, Patrick, like the most ideal building?
Yeah. What criteria to use for existing buildings? Or put another way, what's the ideal social housing structure look like? Which I guess there's two questions there. Maybe which maybe you answered part of it with your anecdote there about what existing buildings would you try to acquire, and then also on the flip side, if you're starting from scratch, what would that look like?
Yeah, so that's like super exciting. That's where like a lot of vision and stuff that like you all at the Urbanist have been like working on, writing about, advocating for so long. It's just this idea of like a 15-minute city that's walkable, bikeable, transitable, where I don't have to like get in a car to go pick up my daughter from school or go to the grocery store, do all of my errands. Like it's a walkable, vibrant city that's meeting really, really strong climate goals, and where just you're creating like deep foundations of a community and livelihood. I was just in Vienna in September, part of a social housing delegation, and I think people sometimes think that, well, I think people equate social housing with public housing and like this idea of like Soviet style blocks that's just like the same thing like for hundreds, thousands of units. But in Vienna, there weren't a lot of buildings that were even more than like 4 or 5 stories tall. But it's the entire city. And then like the vast majority of these units have like these incredible commercial spaces on the bottom. So you're able to keep small businesses going. You're able to have all of these amenities close by your drugstore, your grocery store, your corner market, and not go too far for that. So that's the dream. That's the vision. Concretely in the next couple of years, honestly, someone that's much smarter at planning and development than me will decide that.
All right, let's back up a little bit, because you mentioned Vienna before, and then you mentioned it now. You also mentioned Toronto. I've heard a little bit about like Red Vienna and their massive, starting in the 40s or something, social housing initiative that now is a huge portion of the housing stock. Could you talk a little bit more comprehensively about that, or any other case studies of where cities have tried it? And I don't know anything about Toronto, but that sounds interesting just because it's North America, which and the closer to home, the more tangible it seems.
Right.
Because we can't have nice things here.
Exactly right. Yeah, Vienna, that was, yeah, in the 30s, I believe it was. Yeah, right after war. And a very grassroots party got into power. Did some luxury taxes to provide housing. That the idea behind like providing social housing actually had a lot to do with like the public health crisis. And so like one of their like main mantras was like clean air, sunlight, like outdoor space, exercise. It all had to do with like public health crises of like poor ventilation, poor light, poor exercise. But yeah, like still 100 years later, they have a tremendous housing stock there. I think 2/3 of Vienna's population qualified to live in social housing. And yeah, they continue building up municipal housing every year, 30 to 40 years after a building is built. They do a wholesale renovation, and they are one of the most striking things actually about being there was how deeply intentional everything is. Even to like they have mapped out in all new developments what the like climate around the building looks like, so that they're able to keep it to like carbon neutral or carbon negative. Like we're talking about like that deep of intentionality in all of their building. And here we like restrict architects and restrict designers down to like, these arbitrary things that people think look nice, as opposed to allowing individuals to be creative and to address like our climate goals. So that's what I'd say. I mean, I could talk about Vienna forever, but we could maybe be there in 100 years, but it's important to be practical and like what we can actually achieve. I would say Toronto is also really, really exciting, mostly because of like their resident activities. They have a really cool Twitter page, actually, Toronto Community Housing, and they have like these workshops. They have like, did you lose a license? Come and get a license. They have like stuff for immigrants. They have maybe cooking classes, but they just have this like vast structure of like community cohesion. That's really exciting. So I'm gonna stop there because, like I said, I could talk about these things forever.
Great. Could you talk a little bit more about cross classes? A attendee question. The benefits of cross class communities.
Yeah. So
And that part of the vision.
So I think that for this one, it's important to really bring it back to like how public housing was failed in this country. Public housing did not fail. It was actively failed by federal government and by lawmakers. And it was also like deeply racist and segregating on race, segregating on class. And it was basically lumping poor people into a building and pretending that based on their income, they were going to be able to like do maintenance and upkeep and keep the building in a healthy state. And if you're only segregating out folks based on their income, minus like the very important like racial and class issues with that, you're actually just like also baking in failure, because folks that are making 0 to 30, 0 to 50% aren't going to be able to cover all of those costs that are important to maintain a building. So it was actively failed. And now when people think of social housing or public housing, we hear about Cabrini Green and these other examples. And there are really important lessons from those that we need to like learn and always be reflecting on and making sure we aren't making the same mistakes. But how social housing is like so fundamentally different isn't about segregating out those income levels. It's about everyone having access to affordable housing, access to a housing that meets their income levels, providing housing as a public good. So that's one of the like one of the great benefits. It's also just like we should not live in a society where like, oh, you are a barista, you only can interact with other baristas. Oh, you are a doctor, you only interact with other doctors. Like we all depend on each other in society to like survive, to get everything we need done. And we are like anthropologically very social creatures. So we shouldn't just be like kind of reinforcing these weird economic ideas of segregation. And I will say too, like some folks like in the affordable housing sphere are like, oh, well, we already do this. We already do mixed income communities. And that is true to a degree. I'll say that you do mixed income communities, but you still aren't allowed to have a massive part of the workforce access this housing. And then B, if you're actually looking concretely at some examples of mixed income housing in Seattle, you're actually seeing that the buildings are separated, that the folks that are in the market rate have either separate entrances or completely separate buildings that have higher quality of construction, versus the folks that are more low income that are in a different building that has poorer construction and aren't actually a cross-class community all living together.
Yeah, that all sounds very, very good and well put, as someone said in the comments. As an aside, I live by New Holly, which is a redeveloped public housing project. And one of my neighbors told me, even though it's a mixed income community, it's blocks of low income people and then blocks of middle class, homeowners. They did not choose to even decide. They didn't even think that people should live on the same block together. They still, that was a bridge too far, apparently.
Yeah, exactly.
So you mentioned the passive house standard, which could you talk a little about what that is and what your goals are within that, in the initiative?
Yeah, I will talk about passive house as much as I possibly can. But please reach out to Mike Eliason for further questions. We also do have like a short passive house video on our website, howsourneighbors.org, and also on our YouTube channel. Mike is featured in there. We knew from the outset that we wanted this housing to have a progressive revenue source. We wanted this housing to be union built, and we wanted it to meet like the highest environmental standards. Like too long, we've all just been told that you can only have one or the other. You can't have union built and environmentally friendly. You can't have like progressive revenue and like, we just like have like through decades and decades of like hegemonic thinking been told like we can't have nice things, and we don't believe that, and we wanted to put something forward. If we were already going to go through an initiative, why not put in like all the things that we value and need? So we know that we're in a climate crisis. We know that specifically here in Seattle and the Pacific Northwest, that wildfire season is serious. It's only going to get worse. And we're working at real change and seeing the effects that this has on my friends there that are unhoused and are completely erased and ignored during wildfires, during like massive weather snaps. It's unacceptable. We should be building housing that meets like public health and human needs under climate change, and passive house is a way that we can do that. Passive house, it has like automatic ventilation, and so you're always breathing clean air, you're always breathing well ventilated air. It does a bunch of other really fun wonky things that Mike could tell you about that I won't pretend to know about. I do know that it is like a spider proof form of housing because of the seals, so other arachnophobes like myself, you should vote for this just because of that. But no, in all honesty, it's about like building housing that's carbon negative or carbon neutral, and where folks can like breathe healthy air during wildfire season, because that's the reality of our region going forward. So we mandated that on new buildings, and because passive house is becoming more mainstream, and because of things like the Inflation Reduction Act, we're actually seeing construction costs not be adding that much to do passive house anymore. So it's really exciting. And then we prioritize buildings that are required to be retrofitted to passive house, because we can do that now too. And we want to make sure that there's equity among residents, that only the folks that are like in the new buildings get the nice new quirks. No, we want to make sure that the housing stock that we're investing in is like really high quality and can last for generations.
Excellent. I've heard many arguments about passive house, but I've never heard the argument that spider proof. This is one of the benefits. That's great. I'll remember that. As an aside, one of the first passive house big projects I ever saw was when I lived in Portland, and it was an affordable housing project. And their main argument was that it's easier to get money to build things than to pay for things over time. And passive house is more expensive to build, but cheaper to operate, because there's just almost no heating bill and really low electric bills. And so it'll, again, higher upfront costs, but makes it so much cheaper for residents, and especially if you're an organization like where you're going to hold on to the buildings forever.
Yes, no, exactly right. And also if we're looking at other public health measures, like this idea of black mold, that we just like constantly battle with in this climate here, and we know of residents that have developed like asthma or like really serious bronchitis because they live in buildings and not affordable housing buildings, even we're talking like on the private rental market. So yeah, let's just like build housing that's like high quality, meets high public health standards, we're investing in massively upfront, but over time, I mean, all of those costs just really reduce in the bills and whatnot.
Yeah. It's like a little echo of what you were saying, the Vienna slogan. It's like light air. It's like smoke-free air, no spiders.
And then activity, we got to get the activity in there. We got to have some gyms or bike lanes and stuff.
Yeah. We're getting towards the end, so I want to pivot a bit towards the political side. How's it going? How goes the campaign? I know you like you said, you really had to rally at the end to get the signatures, but I know there it seemed like there's a strong grassroots effort, and imagine your signature gatherers were not getting paid like a lot of other initiatives. That was pure people powered enthusiasm.
Yeah, all of that. And like we did bring on longtime volunteers in a paid capacity. We didn't want to do the typical model. And we try to live our values as much as we possibly can. And also like this idea of volunteerism, that we all just have like ample time to just like volunteer for the right causes. Like this is just something that we just need to challenge all of the time, especially in a coalition like ours that, on our steering committee is like predominantly like Black and brown and queer, and the ability of like volunteerism among marginalized communities, like there's a huge equity issue in that. And also if we have like the money, like giving that money back to our community through this process, like is really important to us. So we're feeling really good. We have multiple canvases going on, door knocking, MLK Labor's co-hosting a few canvases. They're going to send out a mailer to union members in the city of Seattle. Transit Writers Union is doing some co-hosting, King County NAACP. I mean, we just have like Got Green has just endorsed and is probably going to do some canvassing as well. I mean, we have just tremendous support, enthusiasm and excitement, and also definitely some reservations, some concerns over like scarcity. And I don't blame folks for having a scarcity mindset. We've been taught to have that on the left, but we also live in one of the richest cities in the entire world. And as a coalition, we're very scrappy and we'll do things to get them done. Like we'll go to the ballot. If we lose, like then we'll try again, because ultimately at the end of the day, it's like, am I serving at Real Change the vendors that I have the honor of working with? Like, are we serving folks that are being like swept outside, folks that are actually like dealing with the housing crisis day in and day out? And are we at the end of the day happy telling those folks that we serve, like, we're going to get there, just keep waiting? Like what we're doing right now, ultimately it will solve the problem. It won't. And we just need to be honest, like with ourselves and the public about that.
Backing up a little bit, when is the election?
Important. Valentine's Day.
Valentine's Day.
February 14th. Yes.
Little love letter to Seattle.
A little love letter. We're trying to figure out if anyone on here is like super great at puns or, clever quips, and have like a small sentence for reminding folks to vote on Valentine's Day. Please send it my way, because we're doing some digital ads, because it's a special election. We have a lot of people that like have no idea that this is even going on, and when they hear about it, they're super pumped. We do have an uphill battle with a special election, but Valentine's Day, we have an election night party at Washington Hall. Oh,
love thy neighbor. Very good, Ian. Who else has got something out there?
Yeah, right.
Chat is waiting.
But we have, just so everyone knows, like election night, we have We are putting together a celebration at Washington Hall from 7 to 9:30 p.m. So please come through. Yeah, like the American Institute of Architects has been an incredible partner, specifically their Committee on Homelessness. And they're doing like a happy hour drink and learn, if you will, at Optimism Brewery on the 9th as well. These are all on our website. So just like, please come out to some of these events, because I know that we all have shared values. We know that we need to change land use, design review, comp plan, like all of these things have to go together to create the vision of social housing that we want. So come out and network and connect, and let's figure out how to plug in to make this the Seattle that we all want. And yeah, as Doug said, ballots drop on the 25th. It's only a couple weeks away. Ooh, keep it coming.
Another good one. Is this the only issue on the special election ballot?
It is.
And is there any, I haven't seen too much pro stuff yet, except, when I've gone to your website and, through the Urbanist, but I haven't seen any opposition at all. Is there anyone out there working or spending money to stop this?
Spending money, no, not yet. There's always time, but I do want to say that we know that there is going to be a con statement in the voter pamphlet, and I would imagine of all groups, the individuals that sign that. So that is John Fox and David Bloom and Alice Wolt. So yeah, they have a con statement in the voter pamphlet. Happy to send that over so you all can see that before it comes out. But yeah, just really focusing in on how all energy and money should just be going into housing our lowest income residents, and that we already do social housing. So those are there. And actually tomorrow on the Seattle channel, yeah, I will be on that panel with John Fox. So.
Oh, great. What time?
I mean, this is a recording. I think it's going to air on Friday.
Okay. Friday. Excellent. So we have even less time left. So for the people on right now and the people who will see this when it's posted online later, who are like, yes, this is amazing. Why didn't we do this 40 years ago? How can they help get it passed? What can they do? Tell a friend?
All of it, like whatever is
write a
easiest for
check.
you. Yeah. I mean, I have a kid, folks have kids. I know that I don't know how anyone does anything with kids. So if it's just telling 5 friends, reminding them to register to vote. We know that like one of the largest amount of signatures that were rejected by King County elections from the initiative were from actually folks who were registered, but weren't registered at their current address. So these are renters. These are renters that are moving every year because of rent increases and not knowing that they need to re-register at their new place. So tell your friends to make sure that they're registered at their current address. Tell them to vote for the future Seattle that we all want. But also if you want to canvass, door knock, talk to people with like really rad volunteers and staff. You can find all of our events on houseourneighbors.org. Maybe you want to just text bank volunteers. Maybe you want to host a house party, or you want to just reach out to your specific network, or like the Urbanist does a text banking party to your list. Like everything is going to help. We're very, very grassroots. And yeah, it's people power to get us over the hump. But even just telling people, because yeah, again, so many folks don't know that this is on the ballot.
Yeah. I have great hope. Swamp pulled through on a special election, so it's not just curmudgeons who come out. I think
and there are a lot of folks that are usually on this ballot are voting for education. These are education levy voters, so we're talking to those voters and telling them that this is a different, very direct still way to help educators in the city of Seattle to be able to afford to live here, to be able to stay in the city of Seattle, to attract those teachers to the teaching academy who might want to live here. So yeah, this is a vote for educators. This is a vote for nurses, healthcare workers. This is a vote for everyone who wants to live here and works here to be able to live here. So yeah.
Well, great. I think that's a great place to end. And thank you so much for your time with us tonight, but also your time working on this really important initiative and all the great work you're doing at Real Change Yeah, we appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, and yeah, chatting. If you have more questions, like, just feel free to reach out. Always here to chat. So thank you, and thank you to everything that you all do.
Great, thank you. And thanks for everyone for coming out tonight. Hopefully you learned something, and we'll go tell a friend.